In the previous video, we just saw about the Gilded Age. This time that, Mark Twain explains is kind of, it looks good on the outside. It's completely corrupt and terrible on the inside. And how what happened is through laissez-faire capitalism or the system of the government didn't regulate or interfere in the market at all or the economy, what happened is the rich got richer and the poor got poor. And we've seen that pattern time and time again. And presently, we're seeing less intervention in the market, less intervention in the economy by the government, and we're seeing under the pandemic we saw huge gains by wealthy. So, for example, Amazon's doing something like 40% better than they were before the pandemic because people are almost buying exclusively from Amazon and other competitive retailers can't even compete anymore. Walmart as well is doing phenomenal. So the Waltons and Jeff Bezos are getting even richer than before by billions, not just billions, by trillions of dollars. However, what happens is they have control of the market in terms of the labor. So, how much people were paid and how they were treated back then. And again, today we have some laws because of the progressive era, but how well labor is treated can depend on how big the discrepancies of wealth are. And some of the discrepancies of wealth and disparities between the groups is because of the government. The government can be seen as an equalizer or it can be seen as an interferer, depending on your position. If you're a true libertarian, you'd say, oh, they're just interfering, and whatever anything the government touches is horrible. But if you tend to be much more on the mixed economy or government interventionist regulation side, you might say, no, 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 the government keeps things in check. Otherwise, you'll have monopolies and the business take over. So we're going to look at what life was like during the Gilded Age and the Industrial Revolution in America, and then how that results in one of the biggest consequences, the Progressive Era. This idea that things are changing, especially for labor and then later for women's rights. So now we're going to talk about, and you can see in the picture, just how horrible the conditions were. In fact, adults were paid. I've read articles from New York Times that in New York over 100 years ago, adults would be paid something like $2 an hour to work in mines in upstate New York. Children, they like to hire children like these boys, you can see, because they're a lot cheaper. They would only give children half the pay of an adult. They'd pay them $1 a day. So instead of $2 a day, which they'd have to give a man or a woman, usually men, they're willing to give boys $1 a day. And also, there's less liability. If there's no government regulation, we're going to find out with Upton Sinclair, there's nobody watching over any of this stuff. So if you get your hands cut off or the mine collapses on the children, who's going to get any kind of compensation? They might be nice and give you like $20 or something and say goodbye to your family to help pay for the funeral. But there's no government regulations. There's no anything protecting the laborers or the workers. There's no laws. Now this guy in the bottom, Theodore Roosevelt, he's going to take a different approach. He's going to start to say that maybe the government should be much more involved in the economy, and that he's going to offer people what's called he says is a square deal or fair deal, where the American citizen, the laborers, and the middle class people have a chance at something. I mean, you could just see in the left. If anybody that's watched this video has been to New York, they have these like stoops or these, and this is what you can see the boys are sleeping in, and underneath the stoop is this that's a sewage drain or a rain gutter. So the water always goes to the lowest point. So they have a big grid. They're sleeping basically where all the rainwater goes. You can see above it, and it dumps water all over there, and nobody really goes there. So they're probably hiding there and sleeping. And then if it starts raining, they're going to get wet. But that's where they could find to actually live. There'd be a lot of orphaned children. Parents would pass away or get hurt. And the factories I couldn't take care of the children. Just not the most positive time in American history or in the world. This wasn't just an American thing. But you could see just how dirty the boys are and how tattered their clothes are. We're going to see if things really do change or not. So one guy that really changes the era and has a big influence is Jacob Reese. Jacob Reese is he's essentially a sociologist, I would argue. He's a social scientist, and he becomes obsessed with photography. And something is invented in photography that changes the game. So photography is not very old. Photography is invented right before the Civil War. That's why the Civil War is the first war we have pictures of. Um, but what he realizes, he wants to take pictures and he wants to see how people live in poverty because things are very polarized. You're either very wealthy or you're very poor in America. You live in the slums or you live in the mansions. So it's like you could see this in St. Louis. If you go down Lindell Boulevard, right next to Forest Park or the Central West End, you walk around the Central West End, it's awesome. You will see where the wealthy people lived over 100 years ago. You have these giant mansions that are made out of stone. I mean, just more money you could ever imagine spent. They're so big, they always have like a fourth floor, or third floor, or fifth floor. And you guys know why they would have a fifth floor? Because that's where the maids would live. The maid would live on the top floor where there's that little window, and you wouldn't go up there, and they would live in the chambers, the maid's chambers, and they would even have their own. I've been in a house in the Central West End, near the Central West End, where they had a secret pathway. Then kind of go up the side. The maid could come in and out without ever bothering their wealthy family that built the house maybe 120 years ago, 140 years ago. Just absolute wealth. They'd have people sitting there digging and throwing coal through the coal chutes into their furnace, keeping their house warm and toasty. They would have maids cleaning the dishes, servants everywhere, and meanwhile, everybody else is shoveling coal or they're servants, and they're very poor. They work at the factories or they work at the many other places. So we're going to look at this now. Jacob Reese changes the American conscious, the way we think. He creates this book he calls How the Other Half Lives. And what he finds out is that he loves photography for showing the reality of poverty and helping people who are rich understand how horrible the slums are that Americans live in. And also, what gets invented around the same time is the flash. So it's like this explosive powder. So at nighttime, he goes in the slums as a sociologist. He takes pictures of this, tries to show the division in society and how poor these people are. And then his book comes out and he shows his picture to wealthy people and he sells his book and people buy it. The wealthy are curious, or maybe they're starting to feel some kind of consciousness or guilt about how bad they are treating their workers because the people can't afford to even take care of themselves. There is no minimum wage. Okay. There are no worker rights. If you're hurt, you're done. And this, again, this is not exclusively an American thing. This is all around the world, how people are treated over 100 years ago. But things are starting to change. And by Reese using the power of the camera, we can see that. Just like today, in my class, we use video and pictures to analyze and understand history and also currently what it has to do with today. So you can see this is probably one of his most famous pictures ever. You could just look at the Tenant. It was called the Tenant. Tenants, which were these small box rooms. This is really the room and how they lived. And you've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people, 6 people sleeping in this room. That's it. People would be like, well, wait, why is the bed in front of the door? Why is the other bed in front of the closet or whatever that holding area is? Because that's the entire place. You had one room in the apartment or in the slums for the whole family to live. They lived on top of each other. And these poor immigrants would come from other countries to America for a better life. And this, believe it or not, might have been better than what they're coming from or starving in another country. And he really exposes this. And we'll see how what he goes into and explains. I mean, could you imagine? There's no restroom. Where's the kitchen? If you had to go to the restroom, you would literally sit on a bucket or squat over a bucket. And I don't know if you've ever heard people say, like, look out below. They would literally throw the feces and urine out the window. And they would say, look out below if they're being nice, so people wouldn't get hit with pee and poop. That's how horrible it was at the time. And you could see that, like on the top right-hand picture is another picture. You see the glycering, like kind of street on the top right-hand corner. That's most of it's from probably sewage, like urine, feces being dumped out of the windows and flowing on the streets. So disease was rapid in the slums. People are all on top of each other. I mean, today we think about like oh, it's horrible. People die from the pandemic and COVID. And it is horrible. Back then, typhoid, people died of diarrhea like there's nothing. They would drink dirty water. Feces and urine would get into their food. It was absolutely horrific. And you could see this other picture on the left corner. That's a very famous picture. And you could see that I think there's two people sleeping in the bed on top of other people sleeping underneath them on the left corner. It looks like there's another one, two, three, maybe four or five people in that bed. There's some guy from the side you're missing sleeping. This is the entire room. And you can see there's the chamber pot. In the left bottom of the corner is that piece of metal. I don't know if you've ever heard the term so poor he can't afford a pot to piss in. That literally meant that somebody was so poor they could not afford a chamber pot, which is a pot that you would defecate in and you could throw out the window. There were people that honestly could not afford that. It was too much money. This is how horrible people were treated at the time without any government interventions. There's no minimum wage. There are no interventions to help people. It's either pure charity, like the Hull House, uh, or some kind of donations from a church or something might help out. Outside of that, it was completely people are on their own to try to survive. Now, this guy comes along, and he's the leader of the progressive movement. And what really leads the progressive movement and supports him is this new idea of labor unions. And it's not new in the sense historically, but they become much more powerful in the late 1800s. They originated with women in the low mills up in Massachusetts. The women are the ones that led the unions and said, no, we are not going to get paid this unfair of a wage to work at these factories. There was a lot of young single women that would work at factories to help take care of their families. And then after the Civil War, it was a lot of black women, like in Atlanta, that got together and said, you know what, we're not going to wash these wealthy white women and families' clothes unless you pay us at least a nickel a load. And they set standards or an expectation that what was a fair pay for them. And it worked. They said, we won't do it unless you do this. And they went on strike and they refused to wash the clothes of white women in Atlanta. And it really worked. They didn't last very long in terms of days before they said, fine, we'll give you a nickel. That's fine. So unifying, people learn that you're much stronger as a bunch of twigs as opposed to one individual twig when you're trying to accomplish something. So this allows them to negotiate with companies and advocate for better working conditions and wages for workers. And at first, some of their demands will probably sound crazy to you. They wanted a 6-day week with 10-hour shifts. What? I mean, you're talking 60 hours a week was their expectation. I mean, in America now, we have what? 40 hours a week is full time. Actually, it's less. Technically, if you work 34, but 40-hour week is a pretty solid week. And you're full time as an employee if you work over 34 hours a week in America today. And we find out other countries are even stricter on that. Like we saw how Western Europe, like France, Italy, Germany, the Scandinavian countries, even Japan, they have much more strength in their unions. And they get 8 weeks vacation. They get, actually, Sweden is the best for maternity and paternity leave. For mother leave, they get 385 days a year. So they get over a year to stay home with the baby, to raise their child. The father, because they're so egalitarian, they want to treat men equal, they give them 385 days off too to help take care of their children. The idea is that you would raise your children healthy and they could be a good citizen and contribute to society. In America, we don't have maternity leave. Women get 6 weeks, and it can be unpaid or paid, depending if you have a really nice employer, they might pay you, but they can't fire you for taking off 6 weeks when you have a baby. But you don't get paid to take care of the baby, and you have to file it under FMLA. It's seen as a medical health condition to have a child in America. We still haven't obtained, and that's a big discussion people are having today. Should women have at least maternity leave? I mean, even Canada has maternity and paternity leave, and they're just to the north of us. So maybe that's something will change in your lifetime. I don't know. Theodore Roosevelt, he gets behind this ideas. He's okay with it. He thinks that even though he's wealthy, um, he's like, you know what? First of all, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to break up all these monopolies and these trusts. in the Gilded Age. I'm going to break them up. I'm going to make it fair. If I break that up, there's going to be more competition, and that's going to make America better. Then he says, and also he says he was elected president in 1901. He just goes to town, and he's seen as very radical at the time. And he says, you know what, Americans, I'm going to give you a square deal. And a square deal would be that the government programs organized to create, check, and regulate business. He says, look, we're going to start helping labor, and we're going to start helping people out, and the government needs to get more involved in the economy. And before this, you know who ran the government. Businesses just paid off politicians. I mean, they could buy most of the politicians and the leaders. It was so corrupt, especially in New York and Chicago, all these huge cities, the politicians are just paid. So whatever the biggest companies were, they would pay them. And later, they would even ignore things like organized crime. Like the mafia would just be ignored. If they had enough money, they'd pay people off or threaten people. And he said, this guy is not motivated by that as much. Money does not motivate him as much. He already has money, first of all. We're going to find out later on his family members are his nephew is Franklin Roosevelt, or cousin, I'm sorry, and you're going to find out that he has a similar approach too. So he's considered the trust buster. They call him Teddy, the trust buster. You can see he was a big hunter, avid hunter. And actually, the story of the teddy bear, real quick, is he went hunting and he was in Mississippi, and there was this baby bear coming along in Mississippi when he was hunting, and he pulls out his gun and he sees, oh, it's just a baby bear, and this paper reporter's with him, and he turns to like his side man that helps him. He goes, all right, you take care of him, and he walks away and he goes and eats lunch because he thinks it's just cruel and it's very ungentlemanly like for a true hunter to kill a baby bear. So when he said you take care of him, the guy thought he meant like tie him up or something so he could get to it. He comes back and he's like, what did you do? He tied up the bear, and he says, no, I want you to kill him. You kill him. And the guy killed the bear, and that was seen as much more humane. That he's such a gentleman. He's so gentle. He wouldn't kill a baby bear. He would have somebody else kill him for him. So the newspaper reporter called him teddy bear, like Theodore, teddy bear. And that's where the term teddy bear comes from today. All right, we're going to watch a little short video on Hamila and how she's treated and how children in the world still work today. So we're going to see how she works. She works for a Hanes factory in India, and I think we've all heard of Hanes. And let's see how do they treat her and what do they pay her in India and Bangladesh. I'm sorry, Bangladesh. How are they treated?
How old is she? তোমার বয়স কত? 11. 11 years. How much does she earn as her wages? তুমি মাসে কত বেতন পাও? 930. 930 টাকা. And do the supervisors ever yell at the workers or yell at the young workers? সুপারভাইজাররা কি তোমাদেরকে বকাঝকা বা গাল বন্ধ করে? একদিন না গেলে পরে দিন গেলে মারে বকা। If I remain absent one day, the following day they will beat and they shout at us. খারাপ আচরণ করে কাজে একটু ভুল হলে খারাপ হলে মারে বকা দেয়। If we make any mistake, they beat us, they scold us. What exactly do they do? What do they say? What do they yell? And do they actually slap them or what? সুপারভাইজার আমাদেরকে দেখাও সুপারভাইজাররা কিভাবে মারে বা কিভাবে বকা দেয়, মানে যে মারে আস্তে নাকি জোরে, আমাদেরকে দেখাতে পারো? জোরে না আস্তে? জোরে। So slap কোথায় কোথায় দেখা কোথায় মারে? গালে। দেখাও না একটু ভালো করে দেখাও। গালে জোরে। And how many pieces does she have to do? Like what's her quota? Her target কত? একদিনে মনে করো সকালে গেলে 8টার সময় রাত টার্গেট কত? তোমার কত পিস ইয়ে করতে কাটবে? সুতো দিয়ে কাটে দেন। 150 pieces an hour. 150 pieces an hour. When she doesn't make the quota, what happens? যদি মনে করো তুমি টার্গেট দিতে পারলে না, টার্গেট দিতে পারলে না, তাহলে কি হয়?
বকা দেন,
They shout at us.
মারে বকা
They beat us. And is that common? People are beaten every day, or is it very rare? যদি এটা কি ফ্যাক্টরিতে সুপারভাইজাররা মারে, এটা কি ডেইলি হয়, প্রতিদিন হয় নাকি?
প্রতিদিন।
প্রতিদিন, ডেইলি। That makes sense. Are they allowed to use the bathrooms whenever they need to? মনে করো তোমরা যদি টয়লেটে যেতে যাও, বাথরুম আছে না, টয়লেট যখন ইচ্ছা তখন যাওয়া যায় নাকি কি করতে হয়? বাথরুমে যেতে হলে কি করতে হয়?
যখন ইচ্ছে তখন যাওয়া যায় না।
You cannot go when you want to. Do they have to like get permission, raise their hand? যদি কি বাথরুমে যেতে হয় তাহলে পাস বা কোনো পারমিশন নিতে হয়?
কার্ড না লাগে।
কার্ড। So you need to take a card. And how many times can they go during the day? একদিনে কয়বার টয়লেটে যেতে পারো? মনে করো একদিনে কয়বার যেতে পারো ম্যাক্সিমাম?
2 বার 3 বার।
2 to 3 times.
And do they monitor how much time they take?
যখন তোমরা কি বাথরুমে যাই, সুপারভাইজার কি দেখিয়ে দেয় কতক্ষণ থাকলো ওর মধ্যে, বাথরুমের মধ্যে?
দেখে।
The monitor.
And if you take too long, what happens?
যদি কোনো শ্রমিক বাথরুমে অনেকক্ষণ থাকে, মনে করো বেশি সময় থাকে, তাহলে কি হয় তাহলে?
মারে।
মারে। They beat the worker.
Okay, we're gonna stop there. It's hard to watch. It gives us an understanding of what's happening still today in the world. This is not something that happened in the past, but it's still happening today. Now, we started with this idea that Upton Sinclair, he wrote this famous book, The Jungle. And in Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, he's considered what is called a muckraker journalist. And he revealed that, which means that muck is like the dirt. Like if you're looking at a pond, it's really dirty or it's mucky, it's muddy and unclean. And if you sweep the muck off of something, you're raking it, you're cleaning it off, and so you can see the truth. Sometimes the truth's not pretty in Upton Sinclair's case. And he revealed that the truth is unclean and unsafe working conditions in a meat packing factory. And we talked about a muckraker is a journalist that wants to progress or change America for the better. So journalism and media is really important. It can be used for positive or negative things. You can influence people's emotions, and maybe you could move them to be activists and to move in a positive way. But also, it could be a negative thing. You could use it to motivate people to be angry or hate others. His approach was very inspirational to people in the world today. There's a lot of journalists that really feel that his book, The Jungle, has opened the eyes of the world. And the story was that Theodore Roosevelt was reading his book during breakfast. He literally spit his food out. And he ran essentially to Congress to try to make sure that they would pass laws that he could sign to regulate the meat industry. Now, what's interesting is Upton Sinclair really was trying to focus on labor and how people like Hamila and how all these different factory workers, how horrible they were treated at the time. And what people got out of the book was a lot of people are focused on how dirty food was. Like you could see here, there was some issues. They were even, people were slaughtering and, they're feeding dogs and other animal. The meat itself wasn't what people are told. They've had issues where like people were fed horse meat instead of beef, or they thought it was pork. But you could see they weren't wearing gloves. It was unclean, but it was also incredibly dangerous work. They're using very sharp knives and a lot of dangerous machinery. People would get hurt. They would literally grind up their hands, and they would still use the meat from the actual machinery. That's how horrible it was. Okay.